It was a sunny Thursday morning in Los Angeles, the kind of morning that made the city look like it was built on optimism. But thousands of miles away, in a modest press office in Washington, D.C., a different kind of atmosphere was brewing. Karoline Levitt sat at her desk, the hum of fluorescent lights above and a half-empty cup of coffee beside her. On the desk lay a well-worn pocket Constitution, its corners frayed, its cover faded, a quiet reminder of why she did what she did. She wasn't in this game for applause. She was in it for truth. Then came the ping. She glanced at her screen. It was an email subject line. "You're invited. The Ellen DeGeneres Show. Topic: Generational Divide in American Politics." Her eyes narrowed, not because of the show everyone knew Ellen, but something in the way the word divide was highlighted, emphasized, bolded. It wasn't just a booking, it was bait. Behind her, the door creaked open. One of her aides stepped in, reading the email over her shoulder. "It's Ellen," he said, tapping the screen. "She smiles for the camera, but throws jabs like a comedian with a grudge. This could be a trap." Karoline didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, her fingers brushing the edge of her blazer, the signature navy blue one that always hung on the door behind her like armor waiting for battle. Her lips curled slightly. "Then let her try," she said softly. "If she wants to make a joke out of me, I'll bring the truth to the punchline." Outside, the city went about its usual rhythm. But inside that room, something had already shifted. Because Karoline Levitt wasn't just preparing for an interview, she was stepping into a lion's den with nothing but her voice, her values, and her spine made of steel. By the time her flight touched down at LAX, Twitter was already rumbling. Liberal influencers mocked. "Why is Ellen inviting Trump's press girl?" Conservative voices warned, "Don't fall for the setup. They're going to humiliate her." But Karoline? She stayed silent. She had been underestimated before. She had heard worse from polished reporters, hostile pundits, and even her own college classmates. And still, she stood. In the dressing room at Warner Brothers Studios, a stylist stepped in holding a softer-toned blazer. "Want to tone it down a little?" the stylist offered with a nervous smile. Karoline shook her head politely, slipping on her deep blue blouse and brushing the silver cross necklace against her collarbone. "I'm not here to blend in," she replied. "I'm here to be clear." While others prepared for makeup and lighting, Karoline prepared with clarity and conviction. No notes, no talking points, just a quiet, steady fire that had been building for years. Meanwhile, Ellen stood backstage, flipping through cue cards. "Let's make this one interesting," she smirked to her producer. "A little tension keeps the audience tuned in." It wasn't malice. It was show business. And for Ellen, controversy had always been a profitable dance partner. Back in the green room, Karoline waited. No entourage. No entourage-worthy demands. Just her and the hum of a studio that had hosted presidents, pop stars, and pundits. But not someone like her. Not someone who didn't come to perform. The call came. "You're on in 5. Karoline stood, smoothed the crease of her blouse, and adjusted her necklace one last time, not for fashion, but like someone strapping in before stepping onto the battlefield. And when the stage curtain finally lifted, when the lights beamed down and the applause thundered across the room, she didn't smile for validation. She walked forward with calm, poised defiance, not loud, not proud, just present, grounded, unshakable. Because deep down, she already knew. This wasn't going to be an interview. It was going to be a test. And she was ready. Backstage at Warner Brothers Studio, the air was cool. Artificial, the kind of chill that seeped through even the strongest nerves. Staff bustled around with headsets and clipboards, lights flickered in testing patterns, and the makeup room buzzed with idle conversation. Karoline sat silently, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't scrolling through her phone. She wasn't reviewing talking points. She was listening not to voices around her, but to her own center. A young stylist knocked and stepped in with practiced cheer. "Hey, Karoline. We were thinking maybe something softer light beige, maybe powder pink. Camera-friendly." Karoline looked up with a faint smile. "I appreciate it," she said, "but I didn't come here to soften." She reached for her deep blue blouse, the color of still waters before a storm. As she buttoned it with care, she slipped on her silver cross necklace, not as a fashion statement, but as armor. Something quiet, something strong, something that mattered. Her eyes flicked to the mirror. No dramatics, no smoky eyeshadow, no curled waves, just her, firm, focused. In a culture obsessed with glam, she chose grit. In a studio built for applause, she came prepared for resistance. Meanwhile, on the other side of the stage, Ellen DeGeneres reviewed her cue cards. "Let's add one more question," she said, scribbling with a Sharpie. "Something about women's rights. It'll get the crowd going." Her producer nodded, not questioning it. After all, Ellen was a master at walking the line. Smile wide, humor sharp. It had worked for decades. But today, the smile would meet something it hadn't expected. A woman who didn't flinch. As the minutes ticked closer to airtime, Karoline was led down the hallway. A runner walked ahead, giving the usual pep talk. "We'll cue you when the applause hits. Try to smile when you enter. And don't be afraid to laugh. Ellen loves banter." But Karoline wasn't here to banter. She wasn't here for applause. She was here for truth, no matter how uncomfortable that made people. She stepped up to the curtain. Behind it, she could hear the rising hum of the audience, a mixture of excitement and expectation. Some had come to laugh, some to cheer. A few maybe to see her fall. The stage manager raised 3 fingers. Karoline didn't pray out loud. She just took one breath, touched the edge of her necklace, and remembered her father's words. "When the room turns on you, don't raise your voice. Raise your standard." 2 fingers. She straightened her spine. 1. The curtain began to lift. Lights exploded across the stage. The voice rang out like thunder. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Karoline Leavitt." Applause, whistles. A few hesitant boos, just enough to break the illusion that this was a friendly room. Karoline walked forward, her steps controlled, her smile calm. She didn't wave like a politician. She didn't perform. She simply arrived. Ellen greeted her with that famous grin, a grin polished by years of performance. But behind it, Karoline noticed something else: calculation. They sat. Small talk began. But even the audience could feel it. The air was tight, like a rubber band stretched just before the snap. And then Ellen leaned in with her first real jab, cloaked in a joke. "You're young, smart, and working for a very controversial man. Don't you ever feel like you're just reading someone else's script?" The crowd chuckled a safe laugh, trained by years of light-hearted sparring. But Karoline didn't laugh. She looked Ellen square in the eye and answered with no shake in her voice. "Actually, I've been writing my own story since college, and I don't need applause to validate it." Boom! The energy in the room shifted. Ellen's smile twitched. The crowd fell half silent, half confused. Was this still a joke? Or had the guest come to play a different game? Ellen recovered quickly. She always did. But somewhere deep in the control room, a producer leaned toward the audio tech and whispered, "She didn't come here to blend in. We've got a situation." And they were right. Because Karoline Leavitt wasn't here for applause. She was here for a conversation America wasn't ready for. Not yet. The opening jokes had ended. The pleasantries were done. Now, the room shifted not in volume, but in energy. The audience didn't quite know it yet, but they were no longer watching a daytime talk show. They were witnessing a confrontation. One not of fists or fury, but of posture, principle, and precision. Ellen leaned forward, the edges of her grin sharpening like knives wrapped in velvet. "Let's be real," she said, locking eyes with Karoline. "When you speak on behalf of someone like Donald Trump, doesn't that come with a lot of baggage?" Laughter rippled through the studio, the kind that's half amusement, half warning, like a laugh track with teeth. Karoline didn't blink. She met Ellen's gaze with the same composure she had worn walking into the building. "If you're referring to policies that strengthened the economy, protected our borders, and stood up to global bullies," she said evenly, "then yes, I carry that baggage proudly." There was a pause, then a few claps, scattered, uncertain, but they were real. Ellen chuckled, this time with a hint of frost beneath the warmth. "Oh, come on," she teased. "You don't really believe all of that, do you? Or are you just trying to be the next viral mouthpiece?" It was classic. Ellen softened the insult with a smile, wrapped the jab in a joke, let the crowd laugh at the punchline while pretending it's harmless. But Karoline didn't take the bait. Instead, she reached under her chair and calmly unfolded a printed page. "Here's something funny, Ellen," she said, letting the paper hang between them like a mirror. "In your 2018 interview, you praised Trump's economic plan for bringing factory jobs back to Middle America. What changed? Was it the facts or the politics?" Gasps echoed like thunder. Ellen blinked. For a moment, her cards, her charm, her script all failed her. And that was when Karoline leaned in, not with aggression, but with gravity. "You mock people like me for standing by our beliefs," she said. "But what really bothers you is that we don't back down, even when we're outnumbered on stages like this." The audience was shifting. The laughter had thinned. The applause was scattered and unpredictable. The crowd was no longer nodding on command, they were thinking. Ellen smiled tightly and adjusted in her chair, still trying to regain control. "You're passionate. I'll give you that. But passion without compassion is just noise." Karoline tilted her head. Her voice didn't rise, it sank, drawing people closer. "And compassion without truth?" she asked. "That's Hollywood." Boom! A low murmur swept through the room like wind before a storm. A few heads nodded, others froze. Ellen's eyes darted toward the control room. Someone was whispering in her earpiece now. "She's flipping the room. Move on." But Ellen didn't. She doubled down. "Oh, I've got more," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let's talk about women's rights, shall we? You claim to support women, but you work for a man accused by multiple women. How do you sleep at night?" Gasps, applause, a few cheers, a well-rehearsed crowd reaction. Karoline waited. Then she spoke slowly, almost gently. "I sleep just fine," she said, "because I don't reduce women to victims. I believe in their strength, not their slogans." It wasn't a line. It was a line in the sand. This was no longer a Q&A. This was a stand. And Karoline had just planted her flag. Ellen shuffled her cue cards again, her fingers twitching just slightly. She was practiced. She was polished. But she wasn't prepared for this, not someone who came armed with truth instead of performance. Normally, when Ellen landed a punch, the audience followed with roaring approval. But not today. Not this woman. Karoline sat with perfect poise, hands folded, cross necklace glinting softly under the studio lights. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She let her words do the heavy lifting. "You see, Ellen," she said, her voice like polished steel, "people don't tune in to watch political ambushes disguised as comedy. They tune in for truth, even if it stings." Even the crew behind the cameras paused. Some exchanged glances. Some just stared. In that moment, a line had been crossed not by volume, not by anger, but by calm defiance. Ellen forced a laugh. "You're a tough one," she said. "I'll give you that." Karoline didn't respond. She didn't need to, because the smile had already slipped. And, for the first time, on Ellen's stage, the crowd wasn't laughing. They were listening. The mood had changed. It wasn't obvious at first. No loud shouts, no dramatic walk-offs, but it was there, lingering, tense, the kind of shift you could feel in your gut before your brain even caught up. Ellen adjusted her cue cards, masking uncertainty behind a grin that didn't quite sit right anymore. Her voice tried to stay light. "Well," she said with a soft chuckle, "this has gotten spirited." Karoline said nothing. She sat still, eyes steady, her hands gently clasped over her lap like a woman who had come to speak truth, not spar. That silence? It wasn't awkward. It was intentional. The studio audience, once primed for laughs and applause, had grown unusually quiet. A few leaned forward. Some folded their arms. Others simply stared, not at Ellen, but at Karoline. And in the control room, a senior producer muttered into a headset, "She's flipping the room. Cut the segment?" Another voice whispered back, "Not yet. Let it breathe. This is different." Ellen leaned forward, still smiling, but now more tightly. You say you're here to stand for your beliefs. Okay, but let me ask you this. What do you know about struggle? Karoline didn't flinch. She leaned in, just slightly, and began, not with defiance, but with story. I grew up in a middle-class family in New Hampshire, she said. We packed our lunches. We worked weekends. I didn't have connections. I had internships. I didn't inherit platforms. I earned late nights and early mornings. The audience stayed quiet, not out of discomfort, but attention. Karoline continued. I failed. I got back up. I wasn't handed a talk show. I wasn't given a stage with millions, and I've never used that stage to mock people for their values. Boom. The words hit like quiet thunder. This time, even Ellen's smile flickered. For the first time, she didn't have a clever follow-up. She tapped her cards nervously, a practiced move, meant to fill space, but the space wasn't hers anymore. And then it happened. A voice. Not from Ellen, not from Karoline. From backstage. She's not wrong. Everyone turned. Standing at the edge of the set was a crew member, young, early 20s, headset slung around his neck. He didn't step fully onto the stage. He didn't grandstand. He just stood there, voice steady, eyes serious. I grew up watching this show, he said. But she's saying things I wish someone had said 10 years ago. You could have heard a pin drop. Ellen blinked, caught off guard. Karoline didn't move. She didn't even turn. She didn't have to, because something invisible but undeniable was unfolding. The crowd wasn't just watching. They were awakening. In the shadows, a producer whispered frantically into Ellen's ear. She's gaining ground. Social media's already buzzing. Hashtags are popping. But Ellen wasn't ready to back down. She forced a smile, voice a shade too high. Well, let's take a quick break, shall we? The lights dimmed, the cameras cut, the applause sign lit up, but barely a few claps followed. The crowd, for the first time in a long time, wasn't performing. They were processing. Backstage, Ellen sat stiffly, her hands gripping her seat. Her producer leaned in. We need to pivot. Shift tone. Go lighter. She nodded, but her face was blank. The rhythm she usually owned, gone. The show she usually danced through with ease, slipping away. Meanwhile, just off camera, Karoline sat quietly in her guest chair. She wasn't scrolling Twitter, even though her name was now trending. She wasn't rehearsing lines, even though millions would hear her next words. She was doing what few people in her position ever did. She was still. Her assistant Maddie walked up, phone in hand. You're blowing up. You want to see? Karoline shook her head gently. Number, let's finish what we came here for. And that's when it became clear. She didn't come for applause. She didn't come to go viral. She came to hold a mirror. When the break ended and the cameras rolled again, Ellen returned with a strained smile. Welcome back, she said, her voice tighter than before. Things got a little intense earlier, so let's cool it down, shall we? She turned to Karoline, who was already looking at her. I didn't bring you here to fight, Ellen said. I brought you here to understand. Karoline didn't blink. Then maybe next time, she said softly. Start with a question, not a punchline. The audience stirred again. This wasn't confrontation for entertainment. This was conviction without apology. Ellen searched for her next move. Surely, she said, there's something we can agree on? Karoline leaned back just slightly, her eyes calm. Sure, that Americans are desperate for honesty and tired of shows pretending to have it. Boom. The applause came again, scattered, unscripted, real. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough. And Ellen knew it. Her grip on the room, on the rhythm, on the safety net of laughter had slipped because Karoline hadn't raised her voice. She had simply refused to lower her standards. And in doing so, she changed everything. Something in the room had shifted. Not in volume, not in temperature, but in weight. You could feel it pressing into the shoulders of every person in the studio. That slow, invisible realization that this wasn't just another talk show moment. This was something deeper, something raw. Ellen leaned forward, trying to steady herself with a joke. You're very confident, she said to Karoline, fingers drumming the armrest. Especially for someone who's so new. Karoline smiled, not smugly, not defensively, just calmly. And you're very dismissive, she replied. For someone who claims to uplift women. Gasps, some laughs, some claps, a few stunned expressions. Ellen chuckled nervously. Well, she said, adjusting her seat, this has taken quite the turn. Karoline nodded. It usually does when truth walks in. Boom. The room pulsed. Not loudly, not visibly, but something inside people's chests shifted hearts, breath, attention. The control room whispered through headsets. One voice said it plainly. She's not just winning, she's owning the moment. Then came Ellen's misstep. A moment too sharp, too personal. Maybe it was frustration. Maybe it was pride. Maybe she just wanted the last word. Ellen looked at Karoline and said, with a tight-lipped smirk, maybe if you stopped hiding behind that little cross of yours, people would take you seriously. The entire room went still. No gasp. No applause. No nervous laughter. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like glass. Karoline didn't flinch. Her hand slowly went to her necklace. She didn't grab it. She didn't lift it. She simply let it rest there, visible, undeniable. Then she stood. No theatrics, no drama. She just rose to her feet with the stillness of a mountain. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed. This, she said softly, is what the elite really think of people like me. She turned slightly to face the audience, her presence now towering not in volume, but in clarity. You mock what I wear. You mock what I believe. And then you pretend you stand for kindness? She looked back at Ellen, who was frozen behind her desk. Then Karoline delivered the line that would define the entire moment. The one that would echo far beyond that stage. You just told the world who you really are. And then she sat back down. No mic drop. No walk-off. Just silence. Heavy. Holy. Honest. 10 seconds passed. No one clapped. No one coughed. Even the cameras felt like they stopped breathing. And then softly, one pair of hands clapped. Then 2. Then 10. And suddenly, half the room was on its feet. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to say, something real just happened here. Ellen tried to recover, her voice cracking slightly. Well, that got serious fast. But the audience didn't laugh. Karoline didn't look at her. She looked straight into the camera, not with rage, not with smugness, but with clarity. And she spoke again. Millions of Americans wear a cross, she said, voice low and grounded. Millions pray quietly before work. Millions stand for the flag and bow their heads when a soldier comes home draped in it. She paused. If those things make us a punchline in your world, then maybe the joke's not on us. Boom. That was it. That was the strike that wasn't meant to destroy, but to awaken. Behind the scenes, producers were scrambling, phones were lighting up, social media was exploding in real time. Hashtags like #Karoline claps back and #you told the world were trending before the segment had even ended. Ellen fumbled her next line. Karoline, I didn't mean it that way. I was just trying to lighten the mood. Karoline turned to her again, her expression soft but firm. You can't hide behind comedy, she said, when it becomes cruelty. And then the crowd erupted. One woman in the second row stood first, middle-aged, arms crossed, eyes welling. Then a college student in the back. Then rows and rows of people, standing not just to cheer, but to witness, to acknowledge, to say, we saw what you did. We felt what you said. Ellen looked stunned, her posture rigid, her hands trembling slightly. She picked up her cue cards, flipping them, but nothing made sense now. The rhythm was off. The script was gone. Finally, she mumbled, we're going to cut to commercial. The lights dimmed, but the fire didn't fade. In fact, it had just been lit. The commercial break ended, but the energy never recovered. Ellen returned to the camera with a strained smile, one that looked more like a mask than a welcome. Welcome back, she said, voice tight. Things got a little passionate today. Let's move on. But America wasn't moving on. Not this time. By the time the East Coast taping finished airing, clips had already gone viral. Karoline's calm, cutting line, "You just told the world who you really are," spread like wildfire across every platform. On TikTok, someone slowed the footage, added piano music, and overlaid the caption. That wasn't a clapback. That was a cultural reckoning. 7 million views. By midnight, Twitter exploded. Number: "You told the world." Number: "Karoline claps back." Number: "Faith is not a fault." And then came the headlines. From all sides. Fox News: "Karoline Leavitt brings truth to Ellen's stage." The New York Post: "Crossfire: when daytime television crossed a line." CNN: "Did Ellen go too far?" Politico: "Karoline didn't raise her voice, but she raised the stakes." Behind the scenes, the ripple effects were immediate. At a diner in Des Moines, a waitress paused mid-shift to whisper, "That girl just stood taller than most men I've seen on that stage." At a university in Chicago, a political science professor replayed the clip 3 times and muttered to himself, "She never even raised her voice. That's the scary part." Even at the White House, a senior advisor forwarded the clip to staff with a single sentence. This wasn't just a television moment. This was a cultural reset. And Karoline? She didn't post a tweet. She didn't launch a podcast. She didn't do a reaction video. She sat backstage with her assistant Maddie, quietly sipping tea. Her phone buzzed non-stop messages from nurses, veterans, teachers, single moms, and even atheists. "I don't agree with you politically," one message read, "but thank you for standing up for people of faith without yelling." A text from a number marked DT popped up. "You were brilliant. They needed to see that." Karoline didn't even reply. She just looked at Maddie and said, "Book Hannity, Tucker, and CNN back to back. We're not done. Let's take this national." The next 72 hours moved like a wave. On Hannity, she was poised, calm, clear. On CNN, sitting opposite a skeptical anchor, she didn't attack, she anchored. No anger, no gloating. She just showed up. And America kept watching. Churches quoted her line in Sunday sermons, "You can't hide behind comedy when it becomes cruelty." A conservative women's conference in Texas bumped her to keynote. 10,000 women chanted her name before she even walked on stage. But it didn't stop there. A liberal columnist wrote, "I disagree with Karoline Leavitt on almost everything, but that was one of the most disciplined, powerful moments I've seen from any woman in media. She didn't yell. She didn't play victim. She didn't flinch." Sponsors began questioning Ellen's team. Old fans wrote emails to her producers. "I've watched Ellen for 15 years, but this time, she crossed a line." The official word from Ellen's PR team was silence. No apology. Let the news cycle pass. But it didn't. The hashtag number Crossgate trended for 4 days straight. Then came the letter. It arrived in a yellow envelope, handwritten. "From Georgia. I'm 76, it read. "I lost my job for talking about my faith at work. I've stayed quiet for years. But when I saw you on that stage, you gave me permission to stand again." Karoline hung the letter on her wall. Right next to a framed still of the interview, the moment her silver cross caught the light. Not in defiance, but in dignity. By the end of the month, 3 states introduced legislation to strengthen protections for religious expression in the workplace. In the text of one bill, a single quote was cited as the catalyst. "You just told the world who you really are." And Ellen? She canceled her next taping. Scheduling issues, the press release said. But everyone knew. The moment had broken something not just in the studio, but in the narrative. 1 week later, Karoline stood on stage at the National Values Summit in Dallas. The crowd was electric, nearly 20,000 people. They stood before she said a word. But Karoline didn't smile. Not yet. She stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight settle. Then she began. "Some said I went too far. Others said I didn't go far enough." The room fell quiet. "I didn't show up on Ellen's stage to win a fight. I showed up to remind America that your faith, your values, Your identity don't belong to late-night punchlines. Applause erupted, but she raised her hand gently to quiet them. That moment wasn't about me. It was about you. The teacher who's afraid to pray. The mom called backward. The veteran mocked for standing tall. She paused. Her voice softened. I didn't defend a necklace. I defended a belief. And as she stepped off the stage, one of her team whispered, "Should we call this a win?" Karoline smiled just a little. "No," she said. "Call it a beginning."